This is course 3 of the series that looks at consuming Watson services in your Python applications to run on the Bluemix platform. So far we've looked at the mechanics, the basic mechanics of creating Python applications and preparing them to run on the Bluemix platform. We've then looked at the Watson services and particularly the language services, and we've incorporated them into the application. We've created a complex piece of functionality that is now taking time to return a response. So the web application is now becoming less and less performant. So we need to address that, and how we're going to do that is by creating a REST API. So we're going to take the hybrid functionality in which we are using 4 Watson services to identify language, to do the translation, to work out the intent, and to work out entities and keywords. So we're going to take that functionality and wrap that into a REST API. That will allow our web application to call this service asynchronously and so still be responsive to our user, but also it will allow this hybrid functionality to be reusable in other applications as a REST API. So let's take a look at the source code, and we'll start off on the Django server side. We'll look at the main view, and in here we are importing the CSRF exempt capabilities. We can code our REST API such that it incorporates CSRF checking, but that's a little bit more complicated, and for now I just wanted to show you how to create the REST API itself. The index method in this file looks after the synchronous request, in which we use a form to process the data, and once we have the data we call a method invoke services which wrappers our hybrid capability. For the REST API, this is CSRF exempt, so we're not expecting a CSRF token, and we have a new method, process. We still use the form to validate our data, but once we have our data we call the same invoke services method that we do in the synchronous call. So the core of the service is inside invoke services, which is being invoked both in the synchronous method as well as the asynchronous method. When invoke services returns with some results, we send an HTTP response object back. Contrast this with the synchronous, where we render a HTML page. In the REST API, we return an HTTP response of a JSON object. One more change for the server side, which is the URLs PY file, in which we've created a route for process in WL process. So let's take a look at the client side. We'll start off with the index.html file. We are now JavaScript dependent, so we bring in the jQuery CDN as well as incorporate our own services.js file. Because we are JavaScript dependent, we need JavaScript enabled, and if JavaScript isn't enabled, we'll have a warning message. The old functionality is still available, the synchronous call. We just changed the text on the button so we know which one it is. And we've added a new button for the asynchronous call. In here we're using the Django framework to work out the endpoint, or the API process method, and we have an onClick invocation of a onProcessClick method in which we pass in our API process endpoint. So take a look at the client-side JavaScript that we now have. So if you see a document ready, that means JavaScript is enabled and we can remove the message. Then we have the onProcessClick method, for which we have the endpoint being sent in. We flush out a few of the fields on the web page, pull our data from the form, and invoke the REST API. We have a success and error processing. Process not OK will only be invoked if there's a serious error. For application errors, they'll come through the normal process OK, but the results will have a error field which will process accordingly, and if we do get some good response data, we display that on the screen. So let's try our changes locally. Let's modify the text. Here's the response. The old sync call is obscuring the new data, so we'll create a new page and try again. Now we could invoke the REST call and the page is still responsive. So we'll try it in Spanish. We see the text has been translated and processed. We're now ready to try the application on the server, so we will change the runtime to match the runtime on our machine 351, and we'll push the application onto Bluemix. Our application is now running, so we can now try it out. And we'll enter some text. Now we have two buttons. One processes the call synchronously as before, leaving the web page unresponsive until a response is received. The second button invokes a REST API, leaving the web page responsive. So now you have a hybrid service which you're publishing as a REST API that you can use asynchronously, which means that your web application can remain responsive, but you can also use in other applications, and you can publish such that other people can consume your hybrid service.